So I'll just say that one more time. Reproduction is accomplished at the sacrifice of the individual's interests. The cultivation of personal power is achieved by just that, the former, the personal power of the individual. So today I have another reading from Personal Power, Regenerative Power of Vital Rejuvenation by William Walker Atkinson. Now, there is a particular chapter in here that I wanted to highlight, Transmutation of the Creative Energy. So according to these ancient thinkers, usually attributed both generation and regeneration, so two distinct paths we can go down, the generation of a new human life or the regeneration of ourselves to occult forces or supernatural powers. They regard this energy as a divine principle in many cases, or else as a reflection of the secret creative energy which they held to exist apart from the world through acting upon it. So the rationality for this occult, this esoteric, this less secular idea of energy is because very few people are aware of this personal powers within them. But through my work here and through others' work, I think it's becoming a little bit more common. Now, there is a particular excerpt I wanted to share with you today. So in the same way the ancients believed that regeneration or the transmutation of sexual energy was caused by a direction of the occult forces of generation along the new channels, modern science, however, whenever it has investigated the subject at all, has held that this regeneration or transmutation of energy proceeds along the strict lines of the physiological process. So in a more scientific and Western vernacular, I think it's really important that we ground a lot of our teachings and my teachings and understanding in more scientific, empirical, and objective senses here. So it holds that the sex glands of the male and female secrete certain elements which make for the invigoration of the mental and physical nature of the man or woman, just as do certain other glands of the body secrete certain elements which produce decided and marked effects upon the mind and body of the individual whose body they exist and are active. So such special secretions of the sexual glands being admitted or assumed as possible, science find no difficulty whatsoever in explaining the effects of regeneration or transmutation of sexual energy. So we'll go into some examples in just a moment, but here the delineation is for me that if you take an ox and a bull, you recognize that these are the same species, but the difference between those species are the ox still has its testicles. Sorry, the bull, I'm getting that wrong. The bull with the horns, that's the matador, that's the bull runs in Spain. The individuals that are getting those red flags and are taunting them, they still have their testicles. Now, you'll notice a distinct difference in the temperament of the ox, which is a farm animal. It is larger, it is laborious, it is free from vigor. It has no drive in and of itself. It is docile, it is submissive. It follows the agency, the jurisdiction, the government of the farmers who are using this animal typically to carry the carts and move the rice and the corn and some of the produce from the farm as a tractor, to be honest. And you compare that to the ox, which still has its faculties intact. It is more aggressive. It is more driven. It is more violent. It has a insatiable and unquenchable wealth of power at the very root of its being. And you don't even need to take the analogy of the ox and the bull, the reality of the ox and the bull to heart. You can also use, dogs. If you have dogs, and you'll be familiar with this process of neutering your dog if it is a male, and it is to create it to be docile, to be more compliant. And you recognize in the same way individuals who are not aware of that particular energy at the base of their spine, at the pelvic floor, at the root chakra. If they are expelling this energy, then they too are self-castrating themselves. You can make that comparison, because how does one feel after some particular arduous copulation? You feel sleepy, you feel tired, you feel docile, you're not quick between the ears, you don't have clarity, you're not going to indulge in any kind of competitive behavior. So this is grounded in real science. That for me is one of the most compelling aspects of the way I like to teach things. And people say to me all the time, Joseph, if I'm in a situation where I'm not really, driven in my life, what's one of the things I can do? Well, it would be to harness the innate faculties of your being. It's to harness your very storehouses of testosterone. I mean, we didn't even talk about testosterone, but that is a scientific factor here, which is driving you, compelling you to partake in competitive behavior and actually reap pleasure from competitive behavior. In so much as, let's say you're working a 9 to 5 and you have been on the same salary for the last 2 years. One of the reasons why you're not driven to maybe dispute your compensation is because you're not taking advantage of this very driven and primal power that rests in your very loins. And this has some scientific ground to that particular idea. So we're going to move on here to some of the doctors, right? People who are trained in the rubric of science, of empirical, objective data on their personal opinions on the matter. I thought that would be interesting to share. So first up, we have Dr. Kellogg advocating that the continent life says the sexual function is double in its purpose. It serves 2 functions. The first is the sexual organs are always active, even when not excited to the degree as to obtrude their activity upon the consciousness, as they supply the body with a needed vital stimulus and regulator. So beyond the act of copulation, you still have this endocrinology bleeding into your blood that is motivating you. As the latter point I made, it drives your competitive behavior. It drives your aggression. If you're waking up in the morning and you're not compelled to the day, it's because you're low on that particular energy. You should be waking up and you should be punching a hole through your mattress because you're ready to go. And one area is you can copulate with yourself or you can copulate with the world. I always choose the latter. So we continue. Secondly, they furnish the only means by which the physical life of the individual and the perpetuation of the race may be accomplished. In neither of these important functions is the personal gratification of the individual the primary consideration. So I've always made the point that pleasure, whilst a benefit of this particular expression of energy, is not the primary purpose of it. Now, I am not against pleasure. It's really important for me to say that. I'm not against pleasure. But if you want to be efficient, if you want to be effective because your present circumstances are not what would you like to see, then I would ask you the question, why don't you be more effective and more efficient with your energy, right? The analogy I always give is, let's say you're turning on a light, right? I have a big softbox light up here. That's giving me some good lighting. Now, this light is actually very, very inefficient. It's actually quite hot. But I don't want the heat from that particular electric energetic exchange. So I've got the exchange of the electricity into the plugs, into light energy. But I'm also getting a little bit of heat. Now, let me ask you a question. If I was cold, would I turn on this light? So the point I'm trying to make here is that the primary function for me turning on this light is to give me light. It is not to give me heat, right? It's an inefficient exchange there. In the same way, those of you that are self-pleasuring or are promiscuous, that energy can be made to make a human being with hopes and dreams and build businesses and buildings and empires, and yet you're turning on the light just to get the heat. It's illogical. So logical when you really think about it. If your present circumstances are not commensurate with your vision, then I would implore you to think very, very differently about the choices that you are making with your energy, especially an energy as potent as the one in your loins. So let's continue on here. The exercise of the sexual function with purely selfish purpose would seem to be a debasement of the sacred function in which man approaches most nearly for the creative power of which he is the image. I'm not going to go too much into the debauchery and degeneracy of the modern era right now because you already know it. Dr. Nicholas goes on to say it is a medical and physiological fact that the best blood of the body goes to form the elements of the reproduction in the sexes. In a pure and orderly life, this matter is reabsorbed. It goes back into the circulation, ready to form the finest brain, nerve, and muscular tissue. This life of man carried back and diffused through the system makes him manly, strong, brave, and heroic. That is a quote that has been coined many, many times by individuals who share the sentiment from which it proceeds of this message. And it is true. I'm not going to go too extensively into the details here, but you have to recognize the word reproduction means to reproduce and replicate what you already have. Of course, it's going to take your best blood, your best bone, your best organs, in order to do that. If your objective is not to create another human being, that is another inefficiency of your energetic exchange. I would rather you supplement that and regenerate it back into your blood, into your bones, into your brain, to heighten cognitive function, to move yourself out of the present circumstances which you are so displeased with. So Dr. Kellogg says, recent investigations have shown that the sexual glands are useful not only as a means for the race perpetuation, but for the physical well-being of the individual. Through the vital stimulus exercised by them through the influence of their peculiar secretions upon the processes of development and nutrition. In other words, reproduction is accomplished at the sacrifice of the individual's interest. I really, really like that phrase. So I'll just say that one more time. Reproduction is accomplished at the sacrifice of the individual's interests. It's like cutting yourself and bleeding, right? You're bleeding out for somebody else. You're giving your blood, you're giving your assets, you're giving your health and vitality in order to create something else. But if you're not creating something else, then I would have you argue it's better to keep your blood within your body. A law which prevails throughout the whole organic world, being, in some instances, so pronounced that the development of the progeny is accomplished only through the death of one or more of the parents. So you hear this all the time in the animal kingdom, that reproduction kills the individual that is trying to do that. Continence is favorable to physical vigor, that sexual intemperance is productive of exhaustion and debility to most a extraordinary degree. And I'm not going to expound upon that because I'm sure you are complicit with that idea. Professor Newton goes on to say, it is important to know that there are other uses for the procreative element than the generation of physical offspring, and far better uses than its waste in momentary pleasure. It is the procreation of the mental and spiritual planes instead of just the ones on the physical. I love this particular quote as well because I think it draws back to the real source of what this is. It is a creative element. And if you're not creating physically, you can create mentally, you can create spiritually, you can create emotionally, you can create etherically. On these fields, the element still has its influence. You don't have, it's not this unidimensional force. And the yogis, the Taoists, the occultists, the individuals that practice, ancient Hermetic philosophies know fundamentally, the potency of this. They're transforming their realities in front of their lives through the element of creation by not wasting the creative principle. And many men, including myself, are using that to create the life that they so desire. And I would implore you to do the same. And we're just going to finish off by going back to Dr. Stockholm again by saying that this particular secretion has wonderfully eminent value, and if retained, is absorbed into the system and adds enormously to a man's magnetic, mental, and spiritual forces. So we're just doubling down again on that creative element being a foundation for spiritual creation, reality creation. I always quote Rudolf Steiner here, who was an occultist, who said that in order to act on the spiritual platform, to be on its foundation, you must have discipline over the creative element. You cannot be a slave to your impulses and your desires. You can either create on earth or you can create in heaven. Earth is more of the physical, is more of reproduction of your progeny, or you can reproduce spiritually. These are not theories, these are facts.